Hi, this is Sherry Kimes. I'm a professor emeritus at Cornell, and in this video, we're going to be talking about some strategies that you could use to improve the profit from your restaurants. I'm going to call this the toolbox. And so we're going to start off with the introduction, of course, then talk about the toolbox, and then also about how you use the toolbox. When I talk about revenue management, I always like to start off with this example that Rich Hanks, the former VP of Revenue at Marriott, used to use. His mother kept asking him, honey, exactly what is it that you do? And he thought and thought and thought about it. And he finally said, well, Mom, it's just like going to the mall. So let's pretend the car down here is Mom, and the stores are all up here in the mall. And here's the parking lot. And you got to figure out where you're going to park. Well, you could park in this very first spot, and some people will because they like to walk, but most people I found, they drive around and they try to find this spot way up near the mall. And by the time you get there, it's gone. And you go, okay, no problem. I'll go back to that lousy spot at the beginning. And it's gone too because somebody else parked there. And so this is just like revenue management. I mean, if you think about this for rooms, this is, let's say that it's 6 months before arrival. You haven't sold that many rooms, and someone comes to you and says, I'd really like to come to your hotel on that day while they're peeling out cash. And they say, but I'd like a discount. So the question is, should you say yes or should you say no? Sometimes you should say yes because you know you're going to be really slow, but sometimes you should say no because you know that you're going to be super busy on those days. Same thing happens with restaurants, right? Let's say it's a busy Saturday night, 7 o'clock, you've got one table left, and someone calls, let's say, to make a reservation. So, yeah, I've got one table left. And they take it, and then they come and they sit and drink tea all night, right? And then meanwhile, the next call you got was from one of your best customers who spends quite a bit, and you have to say, oh, I'm so sorry, I don't have a table available. I gave it to those cheap tea drinkers. I mean, it doesn't work very well. And again, it's kind of back to who do you say yes to, just like regular revenue management. And so when we talk about restaurant revenue management, I'm going to focus specifically on restaurants and bars. I'm not talking about function space, but what I find so interesting about it is that it's got so many different components that we don't have in rooms. Specifically, when we start talking about, we have the guest employee interaction the whole time going on, which for the most part, which is quite a bit different than we have with rooms. And so if we go back to this good old definition of revenue management, we talk about selling the right room. Let's talk about selling the right seat to the right guest at the right time, at the right price to maximize revenue. It's the same kind of thing, right? Except we're just changing the inventory unit. When we get into a fast food or takeout kind of place, this gets a little bit different because there aren't seats, but we won't get into that part right now. And so let's talk about the toolbox. Why do I say a toolbox? Well, this goes back to about 10 million years ago, and I was taking a course in how to become a windmill technician. My husband was out of town, and I guess I was bored. And I'd be up in the air, I'd be like 20 feet up in the air. And there were three guys in this class who were from a country, well, let's just say English was not their first language. And when we'd be up there, I would ask for a screwdriver. And remember, I'm up 20 feet in the air, and they'd hand me a hammer. It's like, that's not going to work. But you think about it, English was their second language. Most people don't know the name of tools in second languages. And so I started thinking that kind of stuck in my mind because it was interesting, to put it mildly. And then about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I started working in Singapore, I started noticing that restaurants had a really bad table mix, and that I went to some of them and said, I could fix your problem. Your table mix is horrible. It doesn't match your party size mix. They said, well, that's great. That doesn't solve any of our problems because we don't have enough staff to be able to open all of our sections. So yes, you could get more customers through, but we can't handle them. And so wait a minute, I felt kind of like an idiot, right? I was pulling the wrong tool out to try to solve a problem. Yes, their table mix was horrible, but it didn't matter in this situation. And so with this toolbox, let's pretend it's got three shelves in it. So there's this all-purpose shelf, there's the cold shelf, and there's the hot shelf. What do I mean by this? The tools on the all-purpose shelf are things that are going to work no matter how busy you are. There's tools on the cold shelf are going to work when you're pretty slow and you need customers. So what sorts of things can you do? And then the tools on the hot shelf are the ones when you're super busy and you're trying to make sure you get as many customers through at as high a spend as possible. Same thing we do for rooms. And so let's start off with these all-purpose tools. And so with this, we start talking about things like menu engineering. You're making sure that we know which items are our popular and profitable ones. Menu design, how should we set this up? There's a lot of research that's been done on this in terms of how to do this so that you can generate more revenue. Server mentoring, helping our servers figure out what can they do to be able to increase the average check using our data. Upselling, what about pre-selling? Kind of like what we do with rooms right now. Could I upgrade you to a suite? Could I do this? And there's a charge for it, but it happens before guests get there. And so they're more likely to accept it. Plus, they like these sorts of things. And then I already mentioned data. One of the biggest challenges we have with restaurant revenue management is that the data is not as good as what we're used to in rooms. And you can't wait for it to be perfect, but just realize that you need to work on getting accurate data. Also, there's issues with system integration, same sort of things we have with rooms, but just be aware that it's not as developed as what we have for rooms. And then we get in back to our toolbox, the cold or hot. I had this great email once from some students. It was like at 3 in the morning, and I was not up in the morning reading it at 3 in the morning, but they must have been really tired. And the title of it was, "What's hot?" Wow, 3 in the morning, okay. But basically, what's hot and what's cold? Hot is when you're busy, as in you've got full tables, you're turning people away, you got people waiting. Basically, in a revenue management term, you have unconstrained demand. You've got more customers than you can handle. Cold is all the other times when it's slow. You got empty tables, you got low seat occupancy. And I used to kind of go back and say hot, warm, and cold. The first time I did restaurant revenue management in Ithaca with one of my friends who had a restaurant, and I was talking about we can have hot, warm, and cold. He said, "Sherry, there's two sides to a piece of paper. And one side is hot, the other side is cold." And seriously, that's all we did for his restaurant. We had a piece of paper that said hot with all the strategies to use, another piece of paper that said cold and listed out all the strategies. He laminated them back to back. We trained the staff, and the manager, they just put this up in the kitchen. And the manager, when it was hot, he would turn it over to hot. And since he trained everybody, they knew what to do. And then when it was cold, he just turned it over. It worked really, really well. I was kind of embarrassed at how well it worked, but it's simple, and simple often is the best thing for these sorts of things. And you can see this. This is a restaurant. You can see this is it's an all-day dining restaurant at a hotel. And you could kind of see this is looking at their seat occupancy and hot. And I'm focusing here on over 60% is hot. In my experience, when restaurants have over 60% seat occupancy, they're really busy. Now, in a hotel, if room occupancy of 60%, we'd be going, ooh, that's not so good. But in restaurants, you've got things like parties of one seated at tables for four, or you've got some time between customers. You've got different sorts of things like that going on. So there's some kind of built-in inefficiencies. But you can see these cold periods where they need guests. And you could also see the hot periods where they want to try to get as many people through as possible at as high a price as possible. Same sort of thing as we do for rooms. Or this is another restaurant. Here I've got their RevPASH, their revenue per available seat hour, and I'm just using the color coding. So you could see when they're hot, which looks like it's typically about 6 to 8 or 9 o'clock on the weekends particular, they get up to close to $16 revenue per available seat hour. But they've got sometimes like, here we go, at 11 p.m. on Wednesdays, there's nobody there. So super, super cold. Now, we could try everything we wanted to try to get more guests in at that time, but probably it's not going to work, right? But you can kind of see visually what's going on. So what are our cold tools? Our cold tools are going to be things like, just like what we use for rooms. We want to make sure we're on as many distribution channels as possible. So Open Table, 7 Rooms, Resi, If you're using delivery, DoorDash, Uber Eats, you're trying to get the word out there. Promotions, trying to get customers in. Now, remember, promotions are to build demand. And so when do you need them and what types of promotions work? Suggestive selling. At the end of the meal, can I show you my desserts, my dessert list? Let me tell you about them. We don't want to do this when we're super busy because it takes time and we got customers waiting to come through. When it's cold, it doesn't matter how long the guests stay, as long as they're spending some money. And then your reservation policies, you could relax these because, again, just like with rooms, we kind of get rid of length of stay restrictions and things like that when we're pretty slow. Restaurants, the same kind of thing. A lot of similarities, but then again, a lot of differences. And then the hot tools, with this, we're talking about we want to make sure we get the right guests in. Now, one of the problems with restaurants is in hotels, we always know when people book, we know how much they're going to spend, right? When they make the reservation. With restaurants, we don't know. And it's not, and why don't we know? Well, partly this is because the systems are not, the reservation system and the point of sale system are not integrated. But can you imagine this with hotels? Would we ever accept reservations on a first come, first served basis? Never, never, never. Because what if the people who wanted to pay the least amount booked first? It would be a disaster, right? And so with restaurants, since we don't have that system integration really, there are ways that you could use your CRM system to try to bring in the top guests during your busiest periods. Same thing we do for hotels is reducing no-shows and late cancellation. So maybe a credit card guarantee, making it easy for people to do their cancellation, minimizing your acquisition costs. Just like with rooms, there's distribution channels. So Open Table, they charge, right? And so how can you get these reservations done directly when you're super busy, because you might need all of these channels when you're slow. And then make sure that your reservation book is set up properly. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's say that you've got the system set up so that people have 3 hours for a table, but they only take an hour 45 minutes. That table is sitting there empty the rest of the time. And so this is just making sure that we're trying to get as many customers through as we're able to get as many customers through as possible. But again, this toolbox, the three shelves, the all-purpose, that works no matter how busy or slow you are. Cold is when you need customers. Hot is when you are super busy and you want to get as many people through as possible. I've used this with a lot of restaurants. I've used this in a lot of different industries, and it works like a charm. It all comes back again to selling the right seat to the right guest at the right time, at the right price, to try to maximize your revenue. And I hope you found this useful, and I look forward to hearing about your successes. Thank you.